Hey everybody, Mike Shoesmith here. You're looking at an article from Israel Today. Let me just zoom in on this thing here. This is, the title is, what's the title here? Pope under political pressure on religious Holy Land visit. By now you've all heard of his visit to the Holy Land. Prior to his arrival in the Holy Land on Sunday, Pope Francis cautioned that this visit would be strictly religious in nature, but that didn't stop both Israel and Palestinians from trying to corral the pontiff into the conflict on their respective sides. By the time he stepped off the helicopter in Bethlehem, it seems Francis had acquiesced to the inevitable, telling his audience that it was high time to bring an end to the increasingly unacceptable Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and to do so on the basis of a two-state solution. So the Pope granting his permission to split the land there. The Pope then went so far as to christen the land as he was standing upon as the quote state of Palestine, unquote. Our recent meeting in the Vatican and my presence today in Palestine attest to the good relations existing between the Holy See and the state of Palestine, he said. There is no state of Palestine, by the way, but okay, he's saying that as a de facto matter of fact here, that there is a state of Palestine. End of story, I guess. The gesture won Francis enthusiastic applause from his audience in Bethlehem, where the Pope then conducted a much-anticipated Mass. Unsurprisingly, though, the Mass was interrupted by exaggeratedly loud calls to prayer. That's Muslim prayer, by the way, from the adjacent mosque. Well, that's kind of funny there. But let's move on here because it gets quite serious. Here, the Pope calls, this is from Yahoo News, Pope calls Muslims, let me zoom in here. Pope calls Muslims brothers at Dome of the Rock. What in the world? Bring this down here a bit here, and then bring that down here. Trying to work the screen recorder here. Pope Francis on Monday urged his brother Muslims to never abuse God's name through violence as he opened the third and final day of his Mideast pilgrimage with a visit to the Dome of the Rock, the iconic shrine located at the third holiest spot in Islam. Francis took off his shoes to step into the gold-topped dome, which enshrines the rock where Muslims believe the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. So he's calling Muslims his brothers. You know, this may actually confirm the research done by people like Walter Weith, who have concluded that Islam was actually started by the Vatican to wipe out the Orthodox population back when Constantine started the Roman Catholic religion, and the Greek Orthodox, they stayed away from Constantine. They never joined up with the with the syncretist movement and the pagan movement of Roman Catholicism. They never joined up with that. And Walter Weith, there's a tremendous amount of research that has been done which shows that that Islam was actually started by the Vatican to wipe out the Orthodox population, folks. And the Pope here telling the world, confirming that the Muslims are his brothers. Now listen, folks, the Muslims are not my brothers. I mean, I have no interest in wiping out the Muslims, but they are not my brothers. My brothers are those who keep and follow the words of Jesus Christ, who's claimed to be God in the flesh. And he said, unless a man is born again into a new family, then he's not my brother. And that's the reality of it. Why is he calling Muslims his brothers? Is he confirming the research done by, people out there who have linked Islam as the sword of the Vatican? I don't know. It's all very interesting, isn't it? But let's move on here to this one here. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, let's zoom in here. Pope and Netanyahu spar over Jesus' native language. Jerusalem. Pope Francis and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu traded words on Monday. I'm sorry, that was Netanyahu, not Netanyahu, by the way. I misspoke there. Traded words on Monday over the language spoken by Jesus 2 millennia ago. I want to show Netanyahu the respect that he deserves, which he was not shown by the Pope here. He was terribly disrespected by the Pope. Netanyahu says Jesus was here in this land. He spoke Hebrew. And that's all he said, right? Jesus spoke Hebrew. Netanyahu told Francis at a public meeting in Jerusalem in which the Israeli leader cited a strong connection between Judaism and Christianity, okay? So they're in a public meeting, and Netanyahu just said, look, Jesus was here in the land, and he spoke Hebrew. He spoke Hebrew, right? And he was quickly rebuked by the Pope publicly and disrespectfully. Aramaic, the Pope interjected. He spoke Aramaic, but he knew Hebrew, Netanyahu shot back. And this article goes on to say, but like many things in the Middle East, where the Pope is on his last leg of a 3-day visit, so they get this guy, Israeli linguistics professor Gilad Zuckerman, told Reuters that both Netanyahu, son of a distinguished Jewish historian, and the Pope, the spiritual leader of the world's 1.2 billion Catholics. I dispute that 1.2 billion number, by the way. You guys know where they get that number from? Those are the number of recorded baptisms. Because according to the Roman Catholic tradition, if you are baptized into the Roman Catholic system when you're a baby, you are a Catholic on your way to heaven. That is, according to them, the born-again experience, the baptism as a child. And they get that 1.2 billion Catholics number from that registry, the number of people baptized. I was baptized a Catholic. So I'm part of the 1.2 billion Catholics, by the way. And most Catholics only believe that stuff as a form of fire insurance. They go to church, 2 or 3 times a year, plus weddings and funerals, etc. They go, Christmas and Easter, and that's basically it. And it's just in case, just in case there's a heaven and a hell. They want to be on the right side of things. But that 1.2 billion Catholics, I'm willing to bet that there's less than half of that are practicing Catholics. But anyway, I digress. This Israeli linguistics professor, Gilad Zuckerman, I'm probably butchering his name there, he says, quote, Jesus was a native Aramaic speaker. He said about the largely defunct Semitic language closely related to Hebrew, but he would have also known Hebrew because there were extant religious writings in Hebrew. But all Netanyahu said was Jesus was here in this land. He spoke Hebrew. So he's trying to make a connection between Christianity and modern Jews because they speak Hebrew in Israel. All right. And all he's trying to do is make a friendly connection here between Christianity and Judaism. And he's rudely rebuked by the Pope. Aramaic, the Pope interjects. He spoke Aramaic but knew Hebrew. Now, this is a terrible slam by the Pope against... Now, here he is. He's over in Palestine. He's recognizing this Palestinian state. And he's calling the Muslims brothers. And yet he goes over to Netanyahu, the leader of basically the only country over there that's interested in peace is Israel, by the way. Yasser Arafat, who died, some people think he died of AIDS. He was once the leader of Palestine, and he said once that there would be peace in Israel when the last Jew is drowned in the Mediterranean. And Hamas has the destruction of Israel in their charter. And here's the Pope over there praising his brothers, the Muslims, and he comes over to Israel, the only free state over there, and slams and disrespects the leader of this country. What a terrible, disrespectful thing to do. But was Netanyahu right? Did Jesus speak? The one event that comes to my mind, all you would have to do is go to Google this stuff. Did Jesus speak Hebrew? Well, here's an interesting article. And the reason I want to show you guys this article is because part of this article deals with my initial thought about did Jesus speak Hebrew? This is HebrewForChristians.com. It's a special article on this. And it says every so often I get asked from John J. Parsons. Now, I don't know anything about their doctrine here, what they believe, etc., but they're Christians. And he says, every so often I get asked the question of whether Jesus, Yeshua, really spoke Hebrew rather than Aramaic, Greek, or even Latin. After all, there seems to be some Aramaic words in the New Testament, and the text itself is written in Koine Greek. But it must be stressed that This is not an either Hebrew or Aramaic or Greek question. It must be remembered that the region in which Jesus grew up was multicultural and multilingual. Under the Roman Empire, many Greek-speaking Gentiles lived around Nazareth, especially in the large city of Sepphoris. Jesus was able to speak with a Roman centurion, that's Matthew 8, 5-13, and later with Pontius Pilate, John 18, 28-38. But since it's unlikely that either of these Gentiles understood Aramaic, the conversation would most likely be held using Koine Greek or perhaps Latin. So it's likely Jesus spoke Greek and even Latin. And Jesus, now, wouldn't it have been awesome if Netanyahu had come back to the Pope and said, listen, Pope, don't you believe Jesus is God? Isn't it true that God could speak any language he wanted to? Of course Jesus could speak Hebrew. Wouldn't that be awesome? Wouldn't it even be more awesome if Netanyahu had said, listen, we repent here. We believe that Jesus was God and was able to speak Hebrew. Wouldn't that have been awesome? But anyway, he goes on here. Jesus surely would have understood Aramaic, an ancient Syrian language that goes back to Aram. They get that from Genesis 10:23. Indeed, the descendants of Abraham's brother. Okay, I'm not going to get into all that with you guys here, but there is some other examples here that the first one of these immediately leapt to my mind when I read the article about the Pope disrespecting the Prime Minister of Israel. Undoubtedly, Jesus was given a good Jewish education as a boy, even though he was born into a modest household. Well, that's up for debate. I mean, when Jesus was born, some wise men came and gave him a whole bunch of gold. So it's possible that Jesus got a private tutor, I guess. His family was devoutly Jewish, and this is indicated by their adherence to the Torah, Luke 2, verse 39-42. He learned to read Hebrew texts of the Bible and was adept at reasoning with the Torah sages of his day. At age 12, for example, we find him sitting in the temple discussing the finer points of the Torah with the religious leaders of his day. That's Luke 2, 39-52. Such a discussion undoubtedly occurred in Hebrew, not Aramaic, much less Greek or Latin. During his public ministry, Jesus read the Hebrew Torah and Haftarah in synagogue, as was his custom. That's Luke 4:16. Now, that's the example that popped into my head immediately. If we go to my trusty Theophilus Study Bible here, we're at, where are we here? We're in Luke 4:16. And he came to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read. And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah, and when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written. Now, he's reading this. And this is not written in Aramaic, folks. This is Hebrew. He is speaking Hebrew here. So the Pope stands corrected, and Netanyahu has been vindicated by this, that Jesus spoke Hebrew. And if this is the only case, and it's probably not. In fact, the woman at the well, she likely didn't speak Aramaic. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering the sight of the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. And he closed the book, gave it again to the minister, and sat down. And all the eyes of all them that were in the synagogue were fastened on them. And they began to say unto them, this day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears. So Jesus spoke Hebrew to these people. So Netanyahu was right when he said this. Jesus was here in this land. He spoke Hebrew. The Pope blew it on this, folks. He blew it big time. My name is Mike Shoesmith. We'll end it there. Thanks for watching.